So I'll be presenting the working paper, Systematic Literature Review of Individual Rationality versus Group Influence in Microcredit. So I'm Sakuni Senadirige from Department of Economics, University of Colombo. And my key research area is behavioral economics and microcredit, and the period reviewed is 2012 to 2025. So let me give a bit of introduction with regards to my thesis and my review. So the microcredit is identified as the provision of small loans for the financially marginalized segments that has evolved over the past decades from a mere poverty alleviation to a rather complex socioeconomic system that enables financial inclusion and development. So even though it is actually designed as initially as a potent poverty alleviation instrument that is to foster financial inclusion of the marginalized segments. However, the much recent landmark evaluations such as Banerjee et al. 2015 reveal there are modest effects on such impact of microcredit on business creation that leads or rather provokes to do a re-examination of the so-called traditional structural assumptions. And notably, this developing nations such as Sri Lanka people of this country have faced severe repayment and systematic defaults. And even though there are standard economic models that describe the rationality and information asymmetry, it is questionable how these historic concepts are actually valid in terms of the real world scenarios with regards to this debt crisis and debt default situations. So when I discuss why this study particularly is, microcredit has become a major financial inclusion tool globally and especially in the developing context such as Sri Lanka. And even though it has become a major financial tool, it has also its own rising indebtedness and repayment difficulties. And especially Sri Lanka has experienced significant microcredit related debt issues. So when discussing, as I said before, there are there is this economic theory of rationality, but this particular theory fails to rather discuss how these debt-related defaults are happening. So here I am trying to integrate the behavioral economic studies of especially Kahneman and Tversky in 1979, where they say that decisions are mainly and mostly or at times influenced by cognitive biases, social influence, group pressure, and information asymmetry. Therefore, the decisions that are made by these individuals are not always rational. So, the key objective of this study is to identify the research that has been conducted globally and in Sri Lankan context, which identify these so-called psychological, social, and also institutional factors that influence microcredit, but with a special focus on identifying the impact of group behavior on individual rationality, especially in financial decision making. Therefore, I have to support this, I have identified studies from 2012 to 2025, and the key focus area was loan repayment, group influence, individual rationality, and government policies. So, study justification is that microcredit is an instrument for financial inclusion, and there's rising indebtedness, particularly in Sri Lanka, and they largely emphasize economic and institutional factors. And it's important to understand how individual rationality and group influence shapes the borrowing decisions that are crucial for designing sustainable microcredit policies. This systematic literature review has been a multi-step process that has been crucial in reducing subjective biases in literature and effectively capturing the complete scope of relevant literature. Therefore, I have identified JEL classification codes initially, especially like household saving, borrowing, debt, and microfinance institutions. And search was conducted on core platforms such as ProQuest, JSTOR, Science Direct, and Springer, and also identified certain gray literature through ResearchGate. Uh, but when selecting the papers, I strictly limited myself to peer-reviewed published academic journals, avoided highly like empirical. I mean, I have focused exclusively empirical and mixed methods rather than purely conceptual and theoretical material, and ensure structural focus on validated borrower behavior variables. And I also conducted a appraisal under 22 criteria, and the scores mainly range from 50 to 90. And validated the overall satisfaction with regards to methodological rigor and low risk of bias. And with this, I secured 20 papers for systematic literature review. So the selected papers have a taxonomy. So these are the areas that are mainly categorized into behavioral biases on financial decisions. This is like the 50% of the papers, and then microcredit and economic impact, digital and financial literacy, individual rationality and group influence, and institutional and policy framework. So temporal primary spans in between 2012 to 2025 and mainly in developing context. The papers were mainly from India and Africa and other South Asian regions. So as I said before, 850 records were initially identified. 705 were finalized, removing duplicates and out-of-scope papers. And then I come towards 100 reports. And finally, I have selected 20 highly rigorous empirical papers for the final synthesis and analysis. So based on this, I have identified mainly 4 key areas of findings. First one is the behavioral biases and financial decision making. Under these particular papers of Banerjee, Chauhan, and Bauer, it has identified behavioral biases that influence borrowing decision. So these behavioral biases mostly included overconfidence, loss aversion, framing effects, anchoring, and present biases. These were mainly individual related rather than group influence. So it also says due to these common behavioral factors, borrowers have often deviated from rational decision making to make suboptimal credit choices rather than optimal choices, suboptimal choices. And also these papers have pointed out how social interactions and peer influence reinforce behavioral deviations. There are certain studies which discusses about group and peer influence and information asymmetry to a certain extent, not just about borrowing, but overall financial decision making, such as investment decision, stock market related decisions rather than microcredit. And also in the digital finance related decision making. One of the key areas, especially by in the articles like Wallace, Kogan, and Bem, Sleboda, and Skolasva, says that discusses how group impacts on the individual rationality. Here, mainly, they have identified how individuals tend to conform or tend to be biased on peer or group influence in decision making, especially if a particular decision or the particular scenario is uncertain. So rather than relying on their personal information, they tend to be biased towards the decision or the influence of the peers or the group. This validates that there is a group influence that overrides individual rationality in decision making. Also, there are papers that there are certain articles out of the 20 articles that I've selected, how microcredit improves financial inclusion, especially that impact microcredit enterprise development. Even though some papers like do not specifically prove that there is a direct relationship between microcredit or microloans towards micro enterprise development, but there are discussions around this topic. And it also discusses how it changed the microfinance or microcredit leads to change household income conditions. And it also sometimes discusses about social benefits, not just economic benefits per se, how this microcredit and repayment behaviors impact social positioning, normative expectations, and reputations when they're living as a community. And then there is the impact of digital credit, mainly papers like Talkanatsa speaks about the transformative role of digitalization and how they impact higher borrower awareness and repayment disciplines. And also, Harto's paper in 2019 speaks about how borrowers with high levels of financial literacy are better equipped or better having access to credit products under digital financial platforms. Also, it speaks about certain challenges in rapid penetration of digital credit. There could be high interest rates and short repayment terms that even gets them entangled in certain debt related default. So there are papers that there are articles that speaks about institutional and policy frameworks. Out the selected articles, there are articles about institutional design and how the regulation, having proper regulation and institutional design leads to good debt and repayment practices, especially screening of the potential borrowers. And then speaks about how cooperative banks and local credits such as agri-based credits foster agricultural growth, and how crucial they are in rural cooperatives and the livelihood of the rural farming communities. So there are key gaps that I have identified, especially there is a deficit in highlighting the causal relationship between group influence and individual rationality in microcredit. There are certain papers that discusses about the behavioral impact in other decision making, but not specifically in microcredit. Uh, Even though we, as a country, have very high debt crisis rates, there are no published empirical, not like there are limited published empirical behavioral studies. There are other institutional related studies and demographic studies, but not almost zero published empirical behaviors. And the high quality research is mostly biased towards formal microfinance institutions that tends to disregard a massive informal lending networks that does not give the complete picture of things. So the study is an interdisciplinary bridge with behavioral economics, finance, and social psychology. And I have conducted the robust Prisma methodology, and then they can be converted to policy initiatives such as contractual commitment devices, flexible repayment structures, and digital financial choices. When I understanding the policy framework and how this paper contribute towards the policy initiatives is that this analysis shows how behavioral factors, so integrating behavioral factors such as cognitive distortions and social pressure, it's important to integrate them into microloan structures. And it also further highlights financial access is not uh, alone is not sufficient, and the client decision making capacity such as financial literacy and digital literacy is crucial to prevent over indebtedness. And fintech transformation, how digital expansion necessitates robust digital literacy to ensure responsible borrowing, and how institutional quality and institutional frameworks dictate borrower protection and lending sustainability. Uh, so this it also calls for the requirement to conduct further studies and research uh, with regards to empirical behavioral studies in debt related decision making. So this is pretty much, this is the study of systematic literature review of microcredit on individual rationality versus group influence. So you can forward any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sakuni, for the presentation, insightful presentation. So I would like to invite questions and comments from the audience. May I kindly request that the participants introduce themselves before asking a question or making a comment. The floor is open now for the question and comments. Do we have any questions from the audience? So I would like to raise one question from your presentation, Ms. Sakuni. So that is, your review highlights the interplay between the individual rationality and the group influence in microcredit programs. So based on your literature that you have reviewed, what do you consider to be the most important lesson for the policymakers and microfinance institutions when designing future microcredit programs?
Yeah. So mainly, I think most of the microcredit programs are group based, and it has to be group based. But most recently, it has shifted from group based to being individual based, and they are mostly given out as hire purchase loans. And this not not going by the principle of actual microcredit, has further aggravated this problem of debt. So they provide loans, microloans, as individual loans after having a portfolio saying microcredit. So it is very crucial to understand this dynamics of the communities in order to enhance the debt repayment. So the microcredit in group, they ensure the repayment. Most of the time they were designed to ensure the repayment. There is also there are pros and cons. Sometimes if there's a default in one person, it says that it impacts the uh, default of the other members as well. But since they're living as a community, these studies also say that this social positioning and sort of the role that they play in the society pushes them to be better at credit. So I think these institutions need to go back to the original concept of Muhammad Yunus when providing microcredit, and provide them as proper group loans that are not just profit based but also to empower and sort of improve the livelihood of the borrowers, so that uh, they have higher repayment capabilities, and there is this interconnected communities tend to be protected and tend to sort of encourage the person to be a better uh, borrower and in repayment. So that's it.
Thank you very much for your answer. Well explained. And Mr. Anil, do you have any questions from your side?
Yeah, Ms. Sakuni, one of my questions is that I understand SMEs they support the GDP around 50%. They contribute to the GDP about 50%. So in which case, to what extent from a government policy point of view or from the government point of view, how are they trying to, in what way can they sort of take care of this particular community, which produces more than 50% of our GDP? Any answers to that area?
Yes. Also, I think small enterprises plus the informal community. I think actually the microcredit were provided to people who were not into any enterprise initially, as a form of encouraging them to formalize the sort of the informal economy that the developing countries used to have. So I think it's always I always emphasize the fact that the microcredit needs to go back to its original concept of Muhammad Yunus and provide loans not only to the existing businesses in the microcredit spectrum, but also to the informal sector or the women in households who are not actually in any formal kind of employment, and provide loans, but set the conditions right and give them the trainings. It always has to be like a social cause, not just providing loans. Like it's not profit motive. It has to be a wider motive of like encouraging and empowering these marginalized segments. So they have to provide the loans as well as monitor them for repayment. I noticed in one of the micro credit companies, only one, I think, Berandina, they have actually monitored the repayment capability of these small and medium sector businesses, that once they start a business or the agricultural sector, whether they can actually take another loan. So if they have successfully repaid one particular loan and they have expanded their businesses and repayment capability, only they are provided with another loan. But where this debt related issue happened was, one company provides loan, but they are not screened for any outstanding loans, so they are promised to pay the outstanding loans and give another loan on top of it when they had almost zero repayment capability. So the policymakers or these institutions need to really need to really empower them, not just provide the money and push them to pay it back somehow, but sort of connect it to a way that they can get into a formal livelihood and start a business and observe their repayment capability, and then provide another, maybe a little bigger loan, so they can expand their business and continue to repay. So that is how I think uh, microcredit can be integrated into the MSME and informal sector rather.
Sakuni,
I
just
hope I
one more question. Is that have you done any studies with regard to the East Asian region? Have you done some sort of a comparison how they have performed versus Sri Lanka?
No, I have not been able to conduct. I have done my reading, but not really. I think that's an area I am yet to study. So I have to conduct that study, I think.
Okay. Thanks, Sakuni. Thank you so much.
Sakuni, I have a question for you. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, one of the problems this sector is facing is the micro credit institutions are charging
Yes.
excessive interest from these people. So,
Yes.
is there any way out for them in order to bring down the rates? This is well known in this particular industry
Yes.
that
So this,
excessive interest rates are being charged,
yes, the
and there is
interest rate,
some sort of exploitation.
of course. So the interest rate did not have a certain cap until the last sort of the law came out. I think it was in 2018 that the interest cap has to be 35%. There used to be more than that, like sometimes goes up to even uh, 40%, 50%. There was no such cap. But the pressure groups and this people, the activists and people who are working actively on the ground to make reforms, even though they fell into that debt trap due to lack of financial education, they lobbied and they further pushed the existing governments to put a cap uh, and stop these companies from excessively charging their interest rates. But the concern here is there is only very few. I think they do not fall under any governing body. Most of these microcredit companies, so these are the loopholes in any government, like in the previous government, even now. But the situation is much better compared to 2018 and the period before that. Especially, I think post conflict era, like the villages were flooded with no proper mechanism to monitor them. But then, with this high reports on suicide rates and all, the governments, I think, they were forced to certain sort of cut off certain loans less than 1 lakh and provide an interest cap. But there are many companies that do not fall under any of these governing bodies, or the Microfinance Practitioners Association or the central bank. I think the government cannot just put the blame on the people for not going for registered microfinance institutions. I think the governing bodies have even the maybe even the police in a village, they need to have even the grama sevas, they need to monitor what's happening within their villages and not put the blame on the people for going blindly, because their financial literacy is very low. They don't know what they're doing sometimes. So recently, I think even central bank brought out this video saying how they blame the people for putting their money in places that they don't know. So basically, I think on one hand, there's a huge role in a country like ours, where like the poverty is about 25% and education, most of the children are not going to school in these areas. So how can we ask people to be cautious? It's always the government role in a country like ours to have proper legal mechanisms and bring these companies under a governing body and have a cap and monitor what they do. So I think there's a huge role for any government to play in terms of in curbing this microcredit issue. I
Okay,
hope I
thank you.
answered.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the questions. And do we have any other questions?
Yes, dear Sakuni, I am Sanath. You are study colleague in your PhD program. Sakuni, have you find any researchers within your search recommending the available stock of social capital for individuals or groups to make people eligible for getting or accessing these microcredits? Because, for example, when it comes to individuals or group, they may have that stock of social capital in different form, like bonding, bridging, and linking, and in such a way, or
Yeah.
maybe sometimes individual, family trust and group trust and collectivism, and so such bond dynamics. So then maybe sometimes you may have found that certain researchers have already recommended to assess what sort of social capital stock acquired by individuals to be eligible for accessing micro loans or microcredits. Any idea about that?
There are two things. I think social capital is like when people are living as a community, how the influence happens. I think that is what you refer to, the interconnections, interplay. Somehow, with regards to microcredit, I haven't found any article that narrates or that relates to how people behave within a community. Um, there are there are two areas of behavioral economics. One is, as I have cleared them out based on my readings, one is individual based behavioral aspects, others are group based behavioral aspects. Individual based behavioral aspects like overconfidence and mental accounting and things as such, There are certain studies with regards to microcredit, but mainly for stock market related. But when it comes to the social capital related component, or when they're staying as a group, how they impact their behavior or how it impacts their borrowing capacity or repayment, there have not been any studies such that I have found out. That is where my study fills a gap, I think, in understanding the social dynamics on that influences on the rationality of the individuals when making these borrowing related decisions and the repayment. So what I have to say is I have not found anything as such with regards to microcredit per se specifically.
Thank you, Sakuni.
Thank you for the answers. And do we have any other questions? So, since the time is limited, so I would like to invite Senior Professor Premaratna, who is a co-author as well as the mentor and the founder of the working paper series, to add the final concluding remarks to today's presentation.
Thank you very much, Chatula, for your managing and coordinating the working paper series. Before I come to this particular topic, let me little bit elaborate about this working paper series. The Department of Economics in 2025, I think Chatula, we lead it and we arrange the working paper series we initiate. And we have two types of working papers, and some they're purely academic, some policy work papers. And the academic papers coordinated by the Chatula, and the policy papers Chaturika. So with that, we have another two types of papers, and our academic members and policy and the expert, we conduct the day-to-day taking some matters and issues and discuss working papers, and also completely with the PhD student and the master student and the academic type working papers also. This is one of the working paper based on the PhD. So there is, I think, this year, 2026, we had about 12, 13 working papers right now. And 2025, we had about, again, 15 working papers. We will continue with that. With that, this working paper based on the basically literature review, and I think the very nicely depends, and this is the very good platform for PhD students and other researchers to even ask the questions and make the discussion very well done today. And have to be careful when make the discussion when you talk about the microfinance and microcredit, because this paper particularly focused on microcredit. In that case, if someone tried to talk about the wider outcomes through the microfinance, has to be careful, such as the women empowerment and even the employment generation, even the SME development is not really coming out microcredit alone. The microfinance is the, of course, key development tool, which we misuse, of course, the whole years and years in Sri Lanka. Mainly focus microcredit instead of microfinance. It just came in 2011, Central Bank introduced the Financial Act. With that, actually, this mess came. After that, the microfinance institution wanted to register in the Central Bank for some places, and the Microfinance Act came. So that is the problem. After that, now issues coming after this 2015 Microfinance Act, and mainly the microfinance institution try to focus on microcredit rather microfinance, because the microfinance is the wider approach, try to empower people and bring not only the poverty and some graduation also, which include the microcredit, micro savings, insurance, and the empowerment component also, which is education, health, and everything. That has to be careful. The one thing when you look about. And the another thing also, the approaches. I think here a little bit misunderstand some of the approaches theoretically, microcredit and even the microfinance wider. There are three paradigms. The one is the subsidized microfinance or microcredit paradigm. They are mainly focused on subsidized that completely fail in terms of development orientation and bring to second level. Second approach came to the financial sustainability. They are the financial institution as well as the client become sustainable. Third one, women empowerment. So these paradigms also we have to make sure when you ever make a discussion. Regarding this particular paper, also have to be careful few things because the rationale, individual rationale is a microeconomics neoclassical concept. The utility maximization, profit maximization, we talk about rational concept. When you come to the microcredit rationale behavior, individual behavior, it's alone does not work. I think the Sanat mentioned about the social capital. That is a very good point. We have to be carefully. It's not like this study also had to be careful whether focus in my group finance or group microfinance or individual lending. The individual lending has two types of group pressure. One is because within they make create a peer group, and within the group also has a pressure coming. And also another thing also coming the what we call neighborhood debate. Neighbors and, for example, what always happened the other now if you compare to recently I did a study on Radhapure. And what they compare with their neighbor village, they have microfinance, they have so much microfinance institution, and the next neighbor village also try to do it. That also within the neighborhood also, this argument come in, our neighbors take loan from a particular microfinance, why we not? And this kind of pressure also very important. And this study has to be careful which group pressure has to take into account. If group influence and group lending take, that is a different theories, different argument, different analysis coming. So I think Sashini has to be careful with that conceptualizations of the study with that. And what you mentioned also, the microcredit mainly focus on those who are not start the business. That's also quite not correct. The about 80%, even more than 80% microcredit mainly focus on those who have businesses, except microcredit for consumption purpose. The scaling up the main thing, the microcredit. In Sri Lanka, we have a gap. That gap, of course, created by the government failure. Those who get the microcredit and come to the certain level, I'm talking about the micro businesses and SMEs, the MASCO level, there's no institution. They want to engage, they want to take the financial support. The macro level, we have the very good banking system in Sri Lanka, but the MASCO level, bring that ladder, second ladder, we have a gap in the policy level. I think that created by the government microcredit program, including Samurdhi, Aswasuma, Janasavya, those kind of things. That vacuum is a key killer of the development try to bring through the microfinance to the country. So with that, I think this is today discussion very well, and so it depends nicely, and maybe such kind of discussion, I think we invite, and as a PhD student, just not write the thesis, and the final depends is not only the depends, and the purpose of this workshop, bring their argument and the discussion, and bring them to the audience, them to the industry, and become known. So with that, thank you very much, Chatula, your effort, and very well done today, and also your presence, Susini. Thank you very much. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Professor Premaratna, for your valuable remarks. And on behalf of the Department of Economics, I extend my sincere appreciation to Ms. Sakuni and Senior Professor Premaratna for presenting the important research on this topic. I also acknowledge Dr. Roshini Jayavira, and Dr. I.W. Ratnayaka for their valuable contribution as reviewers for the today's review paper. Finally, I would once again like to acknowledge our senior professor K. Amritalingam, the head of the department, for supporting us to implement this working paper within the department. Thank you all the participants for joining today's presentation and contributing to have a productive academic discussion. Thank you so much and have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night. Good night. Thank you.